The funeral home on Maple Street had never felt so heavy. Even the air seemed reluctant to move, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, an American flag hung at half-staff, its fabric barely stirring in the late afternoon wind. Inside, rows of polished wooden chairs were filled with townspeople who had known Ethan Walker since he was a boy riding his bike down these same streets. At 24, he was too young for this room, too young for the black suits, the trembling hands clutching tissues, the quiet sobs that echoed off the high ceiling. Ethan lay at the front of the room in an open coffin, dressed in a dark blue suit his mother had picked out through tears. His face was peaceful, almost deceptively so, like someone asleep after a long day. A thin scar near his hairline, barely visible, was the only sign of the mysterious accident that had taken his life 3 nights earlier. According to the report, he'd been found unresponsive in his car on a rural highway, no witnesses, no clear explanation. By the time paramedics arrived, he was already declared dead. No autopsy had been requested. The county coroner had signed off quickly, citing no evidence of foul play. That decision alone had raised quiet eyebrows, but grief had a way of silencing suspicion. Ethan's mother, Linda Walker, sat in the front row, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She stared at her son's face, searching for something, anything, that suggested this was a mistake. Beside her, Ethan's father, Mark, kept his jaw clenched, eyes fixed forward, refusing to look away. He hadn't cried yet. He wasn't sure he ever would. At the back of the room stood Officer Miles Carter, his uniform crisp, his expression solemn. He had known Ethan too, not well, but enough to exchange nods at the gas station, to recognize him as one of the good kids who never caused trouble. Carter wasn't there as part of an investigation. He was there as a courtesy, assigned to accompany Rex, the department's K-9, for a ceremonial presence. Rex had served the town for 7 years. He was respected, disciplined, and calm in situations that rattled even seasoned officers. Rex sat obediently at Carter's side as the pastor spoke softly about loss and unanswered questions. His dark eyes scanned the room, alert but relaxed. His breathing was steady. Everything about him said normal. Until they moved closer to the coffin. As the pastor invited guests to approach and pay their final respects, Carter stepped forward with Rex, intending to stand near the front before quietly exiting. The moment Rex crossed the invisible line separating the seating area from the viewing space, his body stiffened. Carter felt it instantly, the tension traveling down the leash like an electric current. Rex's ears snapped forward, his nostrils flared. His tail went rigid, no longer relaxed. He stopped walking. "Easy, buddy," Carter whispered, giving a gentle tug. Rex ignored him. A low growl rolled from the dog's chest, so deep and sudden that several mourners turned their heads. Carter's heart skipped. Rex did not growl at funerals. He did not growl at crowds. He had been trained for this environment, exposed to death scenes, remains, and emotionally charged spaces since he was a pup. Then Rex barked. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. One bark became 2, then 3, loud, sharp, aggressive. Head snapped toward the front as Rex lunged forward, pulling hard against the leash, eyes locked on the coffin. His teeth flashed as he barked again, paws scraping against the polished floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. The pastor stepped back in shock. "Officer, control your dog," a man shouted from the second row. Carter planted his feet, struggling to hold Rex back. "Rex, heel," he commanded, his voice firm but edged with disbelief. Rex didn't even look at him. The dog strained toward the coffin, barking relentlessly, his body angled like he was confronting a suspect. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't fear. This was an alert. Linda Walker stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. "What is he doing?" she cried, her voice breaking. "Why is he barking at my son?" Mark stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself between the coffin and the dog. "Get that animal out of here," he said sharply, anger and grief colliding in his chest. "This is a funeral." Carter wanted to do exactly that, to drag Rex outside, apologize, and pretend this had never happened. But his training wouldn't let him. His gut wouldn't either. Rex wasn't panicking. He wasn't out of control. He was focused, intent. Rex suddenly stopped barking and did something far more unsettling. He sat down, perfectly still, eyes locked on Ethan's face. A low whine escaped his throat, rising and falling, a sound Carter had heard only a handful of times before, each time at the end of a successful search. That's an alert," Carter murmured under his breath. The room had gone silent again, but this silence was different. It was tight, uneasy. People exchanged looks, unsure whether to be offended or afraid. Someone near the back whispered, "What does that mean?" Carter swallowed hard. Rex only sat like that when he detected something specific, something he'd been trained to identify: drugs, explosives, a hidden person, or life. The coffin let out a faint, almost imperceptible creak as Rex leaned forward, nose twitching rapidly. Carter's eyes snapped to the sound. He stepped closer, ignoring the protests erupting around him. He stared at Ethan's face, noticing details he hadn't before. The slight sheen on his skin, the unnatural stiffness of his posture, the faint discoloration around his lips, not quite what Carter expected from someone who'd been dead for days. Rex whined again, louder this time, pawing once at the edge of the coffin. Carter's pulse thundered in his ears. "Everyone please step back," he said, his voice louder now, commanding. "I need space." Mark Walker glared at him. "You have no right." Carter placed a hand on the coffin, his fingers pressing lightly against the polished wood. It wasn't cold, and beneath his palm he felt something else. Something that made his breath catch and his blood run cold. Because the truth was beginning to surface, and whatever lay inside that coffin was not what anyone had been told. The tension in the funeral home had transformed from grief to confusion in an instant. Guests clutched each other, unsure whether to weep or flee. Carter tightened his grip on Rex's leash, trying to keep the dog from lunging, but the K9's focus was unbreakable. Rex's eyes, dark and intelligent, never wavered from the coffin. He barked again, sharper, more insistent than before. It wasn't aggression toward the mourners. It was an accusation aimed squarely at the man inside. Rex had been trained to detect life in disaster zones, to locate people under debris, even to differentiate between a corpse and someone in suspended animation. This was no ordinary funeral. This was not the expected decorum of final farewells. Carter knew immediately that Rex's behavior indicated something extraordinary, something the human eye couldn't see. He glanced around, seeing stunned faces, tear-streaked cheeks, and whispered speculation. "Is he alive?" a young woman dared to ask. The question floated in the air like a ghost. Carter's mind raced. Dogs like Rex never reacted this way to death. Not ever. Not in all the years he'd worked with him. Rex whined again, his body tense, pawing the edge of the coffin, nose pressed almost through the polished wood. Carter crouched slightly, voice low, firm. Rex, heel calm. But the dog's response was clear: danger. Something was wrong, very wrong. Carter studied the body in the coffin. Ethan Walker's skin had a strange pallor, but it wasn't uniform. The hands were rigid, yes, but his chest seemed slightly different. Even under the careful eye of someone trained to spot death, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. Carter felt a cold chill. He had handled many cases where death was obvious, where life had definitively ended, yet this was ambiguous. "Officer, what is he doing?" Mark Walker demanded, stepping forward, eyes blazing with protective fury. "That's my son. Get your dog under control." Carter raised a hand, trying to pacify him. "Sir, I understand, but Rex isn't reacting out of disrespect. He's trained to detect life or irregularities. Right now, he's telling us something isn't right." The room erupted in whispers. Some guests shifted nervously, others gasped. A few murmured prayers under their breath, unwilling to confront the impossible. Carter felt the weight of their expectations, the grief, the fear, the disbelief, but he couldn't ignore what Rex was signaling. Rex began circling the coffin, nose hovering just above the wood, teeth slightly bared in alert. Then he stopped abruptly, tail stiff, eyes locked on Ethan's chest. The dog pawed at the lid, whining insistently. Carter's stomach twisted. He had been in tense situations before, but never like this. Never with the life of someone already declared dead hanging in the balance. He signaled to the medical staff that had been discreetly called earlier for ceremonial presence, explaining quietly what was happening. A young paramedic approached hesitantly, her brow furrowed in concern. Carter stepped aside, allowing her to inspect the body while Rex remained vigilant, growling softly, a low, cautious warning. "Sir, you're not going to believe this," she whispered after a few tense moments, barely audible. "There's something here, something that doesn't make sense." Carter's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" The paramedic swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the coffin. "The body, it's firm in ways it shouldn't be for someone declared dead. And there's a warmth I can't explain. Not much, but it's there." Mark Walker's face went pale. Linda's hands flew to her mouth. The room felt as if it were spinning. Carter looked down at Rex. The dog's ears were forward, gaze unwavering, almost accusatory. It was as if Rex were saying, "Do you see it now? I told you. Something is very wrong." Then Rex did something new. Instead of barking or whining, he sat rigid, head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring rapidly. His body vibrated with tension. Carter recognized it immediately. This was the rare, life-alert stance. Rex had only ever displayed it 3 times in his career. Once during a search for a missing child buried under rubble, once at a suspected hostage scene, and once when discovering a man trapped in a collapsed building. Rex was telling him, in no uncertain terms, that Ethan Walker might still be alive. Carter felt a bead of sweat run down his temple. "Everyone, step back," he shouted, voice ringing with authority. The room recoiled, some stepping back in fear, others frozen in disbelief. He pressed his hand against the coffin lid again, this time with more force. Beneath his palm there was the faintest give, subtle but unmistakable. The wood, polished and strong, seemed to respond slightly to pressure from inside. Carter's breath caught. His mind raced. Rex whined again, pawing harder. Then, almost as if responding to some internal signal, the dog barked once, short, sharp, insistent, and backed up slightly, circling the coffin. His gaze never left Ethan's face. Carter's thoughts collided in a storm of disbelief, fear, and urgency. Could it be possible? Could he actually be alive? A sudden, almost imperceptible movement caught Carter's eye. The eyelids twitched. Not a full blink, just a faint flutter. Carter's heart skipped a beat. He leaned closer. Rex barked again, more urgently than before. It was no longer a warning. It was a command. Something was inside that coffin, alive. And if they didn't act fast, no one could predict what would happen next. The mourners held their collective breath, unable to process the impossible. The room, once filled with solemn grief, was now charged with an unbearable tension, the kind that makes time stretch and minutes feel like hours. Rex, unwavering, continued his vigil, his every instinct screaming the same truth. Ethan Walker was not dead. And the revelation that followed would shock the town to its core. The air in the funeral home was thick with disbelief and tension. Every guest froze, uncertain whether to scream, faint, or rush for the door. Some clutched their chest, others whispered prayers that faltered halfway through, eyes darting nervously to the coffin. Linda Walker's hands trembled violently as she covered her mouth, trying to hold back a scream. "Oh God, no, it can't be," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Her husband, Mark, looked as though he had been punched in the stomach. His face drained of color, jaw tight, fists clenched. This isn't possible," he growled, stepping closer to the coffin as if sheer proximity might force reality into submission. Carter remained calm on the surface, but adrenaline coursed through him like wildfire. He glanced at Rex, whose intense gaze never wavered from Ethan's face. The dog's growl had softened into a low, steady whine, a sound Carter had only ever heard when Rex detected faint life. Rex pawed at the edge of the coffin again, insistent, his nails scraping the polished wood. Carter could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Rex doesn't make mistakes. Not ever. "Officer," Mark shouted, stepping forward, face red with panic and anger. "What are you doing? That's my son. You're telling me he's alive. You're lying." Carter didn't respond. He couldn't. Instead, he pressed his hand lightly against the coffin's lid and froze. Beneath his palm, he felt something, a subtle warmth, a faint pulse, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. His stomach dropped. This isn't a mistake. This is real. A young paramedic, previously hovering near the back of the room, stepped forward hesitantly, her eyes wide. "Sir, I can feel it too," she stammered. There's life, faint, but it's there." She swallowed hard, glancing around the room, almost afraid to speak further. "We need to open the coffin. Now." Linda Walker gasped, stumbling backward, her hands gripping her hair. "No, you can't. He's dead. He's my son." Her voice cracked, desperation lacing every word. "Mom, please," whispered Ethan's younger sister Hannah, gripping her mother's arm. "Something's wrong. Please just check." Mark's fists tightened around the armrests of a nearby chair. His knuckles whitened. "I will not," he began, but Carter stepped firmly between him and the coffin. "Sir, I understand your fear." "I do," Carter said, his voice calm but insistent. "I'm telling you, Rex wouldn't act like this unless there was something seriously wrong. We need to verify it. We can't take chances with his life." Mark's eyes burned with disbelief and anger. But before he could protest further, Rex let out a sudden bark, sharp and insistent, almost commanding. Carter looked down at him. The dog's tail stiffened, ears forward, body coiled like a spring. Rex was signaling an emergency, and the certainty in his posture was undeniable. Carter nodded to the paramedic. "Open it, carefully. We need to know what we're dealing with." The room held its collective breath as two paramedics approached the coffin. Gloves on, they placed their hands on the lid and slowly lifted it. The hinges creaked, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Everyone's eyes locked onto Ethan's still form, rigid in the coffin. Then, as the lid opened fully, a faint but unmistakable gasp escaped the body. A shiver ran through the crowd. Linda screamed, stumbling backward into her husband's arms. "No, that's impossible," she cried, her face pale with terror. Carter leaned in, eyes scanning Ethan's face. The lips were a dull blue, but there was a subtle quiver. The chest lifted slightly, a faint, irregular rise and fall. Carter's pulse raced. He glanced at the paramedics. "Pulse," one whispered, disbelief etched across her face. "There's a pulse. Faint, but it's there." The room erupted into chaos. Some guests screamed, others knelt in prayer, others simply stood frozen, staring in stunned silence. Rex barked again, this time with excitement, tail wagging, but still focused intently on Ethan. Carter felt his stomach twist in a combination of relief and horror. Mark and Linda froze, horror and relief mixing into an incomprehensible cocktail of emotion. Mark's knees buckled slightly as he dropped to one side of the coffin, gripping his son's hand. "Ethan! Oh my God, Ethan!" he choked out, tears streaming freely. Rex barked a final time, then leaned forward, placing his head gently on the edge of the coffin, eyes watching every movement of Ethan's body. The dog's instincts had saved the man before any human could realize the danger. Carter felt his phone buzz in his pocket, a text from the dispatcher, confirming situation, ambulance en route, he quickly replied, watching Ethan's chest rise and fall. "Get him stabilized," Carter instructed the paramedics. "We're moving him immediately. Keep him under observation. Now." Linda clung to Ethan's arm as paramedics carefully lifted him from the coffin. His body was limp but not lifeless, a terrifyingly thin line between death and survival. Hannah followed closely, tears streaking her face, whispering to her brother as he was wheeled away. As the ambulance doors closed, Carter stepped back looking at Rex. The dog's gaze never left the vehicle, posture alert. "Good boy," Carter muttered, voice tight. Rex barked softly, as if acknowledging that the worst was not over. The family was shaken beyond recognition. Their son had been declared dead, placed in a coffin, and now, by some miracle, or instinct, they had realized he was alive. And the questions that hung over the room were more terrifying than the answers anyone could give. How had Ethan been declared dead? Who had put him in that coffin? And why? The paramedics closed the ambulance doors, siren wailing as it pulled away. Inside, Ethan stirred slightly, groaning softly, a flicker of awareness crossing his face. Outside, Carter patted Rex, whose instincts had uncovered what no human had noticed. But even as relief flooded the room, the shadow of danger loomed large. This was no accident. Someone had wanted Ethan gone, and now with him alive, that person, or persons, knew their plan had failed. Carter's eyes narrowed. He looked down at Rex, who barked once decisively. The dog had led them to the truth, but Carter knew this was only the beginning. Because the real nightmare, the one that had put Ethan in that coffin, was still out there. The funeral home felt like it had transformed into a nightmare. Time itself seemed to stretch as everyone waited, frozen in disbelief, their eyes locked on the now empty space where Ethan had been. The paramedics carefully wheeled the stretcher back, each step measured, as Carter followed closely behind, his hand lightly resting on Rex's head to keep the dog calm. But even Rex seemed tense, his ears forward, muscles coiled, as though sensing dangers unseen. Inside the ambulance, Ethan's body lay stiff, pale, and fragile, but unmistakably alive. His chest rose and fell with a shallow, uneven rhythm. A faint pulse beat beneath his wrist, weak but steady. Carter watched as the paramedics checked for vital signs, their hands trembling slightly despite their professional composure. "His breathing is irregular," one paramedic noted, her voice low but urgent. "He's alive, but barely. We need to get him stabilized immediately." Ethan's mother, Linda, had insisted on following in the family car, her hands clamped tightly over her mouth, tears streaking down her face. Mark stayed near the ambulance, gripping the edge of the stretcher like he might lose his son again if he let go. Even Hannah, Ethan's younger sister, had tears streaming down her cheeks, staring at her brother in awe and disbelief. Carter kept a careful distance, observing everything, analyzing. The signs didn't lie. Ethan was alive. But how? He had been declared dead, placed in a coffin, and yet here he was. And beneath the surface of the miracle lay a deeper, darker truth. Someone had put him in that coffin intentionally. The paramedics loaded Ethan into the hospital's trauma bay, wheeling him quickly through the fluorescent-lit corridors. Every monitor, every machine beeped with urgency, reflecting the fragility of his condition. Carter trailed behind, Rex at his side, senses on high alert. Even as the medical team prepared to work, the dog's posture suggested he hadn't finished detecting threats. A nurse stepped forward to explain the situation to the family. "He's alive, but in a state of profound paralysis. We suspect drug-induced suspension, an extremely rare sedative that mimics death. It's dangerous, and we have to monitor him closely." Linda sank to a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Mark hovered over the stretcher, hand pressed to Ethan's arm, whispering, "Please wake up, son. Please." Carter's mind raced. He had seen cases where people were misdiagnosed or accidentally declared dead, but never like this. Not with such precision, not with such clear intent. This wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted Ethan gone. As doctors and nurses worked, Carter noticed subtle bruises around Ethan's wrists and faint abrasions near the neck. Not enough to cause death, but consistent with restraint. Someone had confined him, sedated him, and placed him in a coffin as if to ensure he would never be found alive. The thought made Carter's stomach twist with rage. Rex barked suddenly, a short, sharp bark alerting Carter to something unusual. The dog's nose twitched, scanning the area, sensing something humans could not. Carter followed his gaze toward a corner of the room where a small, discarded vial rested on the floor. It had been overlooked in the chaos, partially hidden beneath a chair. Carter's instincts screamed. He reached down carefully, picking it up. The label was faded, almost illegible, but the contents appeared chemical, unknown, highly potent. The medical team's attention remained on Ethan, stabilizing his vital signs. Carter turned to Mark and Linda. This wasn't a natural death. Someone gave him something that mimicked death. This was planned. Someone wanted him buried alive. Mark's eyes widened in horror. Who would do that? Who? Carter's jaw tightened. That's what we need to find out, and whoever it is, they're still out there. They planned this carefully. They underestimated one thing, though. He glanced down at Rex, who barked once more, alert and unwavering. This dog. Meanwhile, Ethan's chest began to rise more steadily, a subtle but clear sign of returning strength. The doctors adjusted his IV lines, monitoring his vitals. He stirred slightly, fingers twitching. His eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear mingling in his gaze as he tried to take in the bright hospital lights, the strangers in scrubs, and the frantic faces of his family. "Mom, Dad," he whispered hoarsely, voice barely audible. Linda sobbed, bending over the stretcher to press her cheek against his arm. "Yes, baby, it's me. You're alive, you're alive." Mark shook his head, overwhelmed by emotion, gripping Ethan's hand tightly. "I can't believe this. We thought we lost you." Carter, observing from a distance, felt a chill run down his spine. The family's relief was raw and immediate, but he couldn't shake the tension in the room, the lingering question of why. Someone had intended to end Ethan's life. Someone had planned to bury him alive. The details didn't add up, and the thought of a human capable of such cold calculation made his stomach churn. Rex, still alert, paced the room quietly, sniffing around Ethan and the immediate vicinity. Carter watched the dog, aware that Rex had detected life, danger, and deceit, long before anyone else had noticed. The dog's instincts had been the first warning, and perhaps the only reason Ethan was alive at that moment. Outside in the funeral home, murmurs had turned into rumors. Guests whispered about the impossible. A man declared dead, placed in a coffin, now alive. Phones rang, calling friends and family, spreading the story faster than anyone could process. Social media would explode with speculation within hours. But inside the hospital, reality was far darker than any headline. The doctors stabilized Ethan enough to speak. He groaned softly, attempting to form words. I can't remember." Carter stepped closer. "It's okay, Ethan. You're safe now. You're alive." Ethan's eyes widened. "Alive, but the coffin." Carter nodded grimly. "We'll explain everything. But first, we need to know how this happened. Someone tried to kill you, and we need to find them before they strike again." Ethan's face went pale as he tried to comprehend the words. Fear, confusion, and disbelief collided. Who would do this to me?" Carter shook his head. "That's what we're going to find out. And Rex," he said, glancing down at the K9, "made sure you got the chance to answer it yourself." Rex barked once sharply and sat beside the stretcher, gaze locked on Ethan. The dog's instincts had saved him, but Carter knew the danger wasn't over. Whoever had orchestrated this plan was still out there, watching, waiting, and possibly planning the next move. The room grew quiet again, the frantic rush of activity slowing as Ethan's vital signs stabilized. But beneath the surface, tension lingered like a storm cloud refusing to dissipate. Carter felt it in his chest, a gnawing sense of urgency. The coffin had been only the beginning. The truth behind why Ethan was buried alive and who wanted him dead was about to unravel, and no one in the room was prepared for what they were about to discover. And deep down, Carter knew. Rex had only revealed the tip of a far more sinister plan. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the walls as Ethan lay in the trauma bed, pale but alive. Machines beeped rhythmically, monitoring every vital sign, but the rhythmic sounds did little to calm the tension thickening the room. Carter remained close, watching, analyzing. Rex sat by the stretcher, tail stiff, ears alert. Even with Ethan stabilized, Carter felt a gnawing unease. The dog's instincts had saved him once, but the questions remained. Ethan blinked slowly, his mind foggy from the rare sedative coursing through his veins. "Why? What?" he murmured, struggling to speak. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but the terror in it was unmistakable. I was dead." Carter shook his head gently. "No, Ethan, you're alive, but someone tried to make you look dead. Someone wanted you buried." Ethan's eyes widened, fear eclipsing the confusion. "Buried? But why? Who? I don't understand." Linda's hands shook violently as she gripped Ethan's arm. "Baby, listen, you're safe now. That's all that matters. We'll figure out who did this. We have to." Her voice trembled, but determination shone through the grief. Carter, however, knew it wasn't that simple. Whoever had orchestrated this plan had done so with precision. Ethan's car, the official death declaration, the coffin, everything had been meticulously staged. There were no witnesses, no video footage of the supposed accident, only the official report stating he had died on that rural highway. But Carter's gut screamed that this had been intentional, a plan executed by someone who had studied the system carefully. He turned to Rex, who sat alert, scanning the room, nose twitching at the subtle scents. Carter knew the dog was still sensing residual threats. "Rex," he murmured, scratching behind the dog's ear, "we're not done yet. Find anything you can." Rex barked softly in acknowledgement, as if understanding the gravity of the task. The medical team adjusted Ethan's IV lines, their movements precise but careful, aware of the extraordinary nature of the case. The rare sedative that had mimicked death was potent but detectable only with specialized toxicology. Carter reached for his phone, dialing the department. "Dispatch, I need an immediate trace on Ethan Walker's medical and death records. Full background. And check with the coroner's office for the original certificate. Something doesn't add up." While waiting for the response, Carter observed Ethan's condition. The faint bruises on his wrists and neck were subtle but undeniable. There were slight abrasions on his arms, consistent with restraint. This wasn't an accidental drug overdose or a tragic misdiagnosis. Someone had held him down, sedated him, and orchestrated the near-perfect illusion of death. The dispatcher called back within minutes. "Officer Carter, hear what we've got. Ethan Walker's death certificate was filed 3 days ago, signed off by the county coroner. Autopsy. None recorded. Ambulance records. 0. The death was registered, paperwork completed, and the body never formally examined by a medical examiner. It's highly unusual." Carter exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "Unusual doesn't begin to cover it. Who signed off on this?" The dispatcher replied, voice hesitant. "A private contractor the coroner uses occasionally. Name, William Harlan. Appears he processed the certificate personally. All records in order, but it's suspicious. Someone bypassed standard protocol." Carter's mind raced. William Harlan had access, authority, and the opportunity to falsify records, but that was only part of the puzzle. Who had actually administered the sedative? Who had placed Ethan in the coffin? And why? He looked over at Ethan, whose eyes fluttered open once more. Confusion, fear, and a faint glimmer of recognition were etched across his face. "Officer, I remember someone at the bar, then a car and nothing." Carter nodded slowly. "Someone drugged you, they staged your death. You were buried alive almost. But Rex," he glanced down at the dog, who gave a small bark, tail stiff, "saved you before it was too late." Ethan's breath hitched, horror spreading across his features. "Why me? Who? Why would they?" Carter's eyes narrowed. "That's what we're going to find out, and we're going to make sure they pay." Meanwhile, the toxicology report began to reveal the extent of the sedative's potency. It was an experimental compound, synthetic, virtually undetectable in standard screenings. Whoever had given it to Ethan had carefully chosen a substance designed to mimic death so convincingly that even paramedics were fooled. Only Rex's instincts had detected the faint signs of life. Carter's phone buzzed again, a text from dispatch. Check ambulance route. Last known location. Carter's mind snapped to attention. Whoever had orchestrated this plan hadn't accounted for every variable. The security footage from nearby intersections was scant, but preliminary review showed Ethan's car parked alone near the highway. No accident damage, no witnesses. But then, strangely, a large white van appeared on the grainy footage, moving in tandem with his car before it disappeared. Carter frowned. Someone followed him, someone put him in that coffin, and someone made sure the paperwork made him officially dead. Linda's sobs filled the room as she looked from her son to Carter. Who could do this? Carter's jaw tightened. Someone who wanted you out of the picture, someone who thought the system would hide the truth, but they didn't count on Rex. Ethan's weak fingers twitched against the hospital sheet. But why? What did I do? Carter's expression hardened. It's not what you did, it's what they wanted. Money, revenge, fear, or something else. We don't know yet, but we will. Hours passed as Ethan's body began to stabilize. Machines beeped steadily. The sedative began to wear off, leaving him groggy but conscious. Carter and Rex never left his side. Outside the room, detectives started preliminary interviews, piecing together the fragments of an impossible crime. Carter's mind returned to the footage, the sedative, and the coffin. Each piece hinted at a larger conspiracy. Someone had carefully studied Ethan's habits, his routines, and the town's system for processing death certificates. This was no random attack. It was meticulously planned, executed with precision, and almost entirely foolproof. The realization hit Carter like a punch to the gut. Whoever orchestrated this could strike again. And if they had targeted Ethan once, the question wasn't whether they could strike again, but who else might be in danger. Rex barked suddenly, alert. Carter looked down at him. The dog's gaze was fixed on the door, ears forward, muscles coiled. Instinctively, Carter understood. The threat was closer than anyone realized. And in that moment, Carter knew with absolute certainty that uncovering why Ethan had been declared dead, and who had orchestrated it, was only the beginning of a far more terrifying truth. Because someone had wanted Ethan buried alive, and that someone was still out there. The quiet hum of the hospital machines contrasted sharply with the storm raging in Carter's mind. Every detail of the case was beginning to coalesce into a chilling picture. Ethan had been declared dead, placed in a coffin, and nearly buried alive. The sedative, the falsified paperwork, the suspicious ambulance footage, all pointed to a meticulously planned crime. Carter knew instinctively that this was no random act. It was personal. Someone close to Ethan had orchestrated it. Carter had spent the last few hours combing through records, cross-referencing the coroner's contractor William Harlan, Ethan's friends, acquaintances, and anyone with access to the county's administrative system. What he found made his stomach turn. One name kept appearing alongside the death certificate: Aaron Fletcher. Ethan's childhood friend, someone he had grown up with, laughed with, shared secrets with. Aaron had suddenly accrued significant debt in the past few months: loans, unpaid bills, and a gambling habit that had spiraled out of control. Carter's hand tightened on his phone. He had to speak to Aaron immediately. Rex, sensing the tension, let out a low growl, tail stiff, ears pricked. Carter reached for Ethan's family, careful not to alarm them further. "I think we have a lead," he said quietly. "It's someone close, someone who had access, someone desperate." Mark Walker froze. "Aaron, my son's friend." His voice wavered between disbelief and fury. "He wouldn't, he could." Carter's jaw tightened. "People do things you'd never imagine, sir, especially when money and desperation collide. But we need proof before we move. Rex has already detected anomalies, but we can't accuse anyone without evidence." Hours later, with Ethan stable and resting under heavy monitoring, Carter visited Aaron's apartment with two detectives. The building was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls, as though the space itself anticipated the confrontation. Carter rang the bell, and the door opened to reveal Aaron, pale, fidgeting, pretending to be surprised. "Officer Carter, what's this about?" Aaron asked, trying to mask his nerves with a smile. Carter's eyes narrowed. "We need to talk about Ethan Walker." He held up the death certificate. "Explain this." Aaron's facade cracked just slightly, a fleeting twitch, a nervous glance toward the floor. Carter noticed it immediately. Rex, sitting calmly at the doorway, let out a single, low growl, tail stiff. Carter knew the dog had already picked up on Aaron's deceit. I don't know what you mean," Aaron stammered, voice rising defensively. "Ethan dead, that's impossible." Carter's gaze hardened. Impossible, not for someone who staged the entire scene. The ambulance logs, the sedative, the coffin, all point to calculated intent. And we have your connection to the coroner's contractor. William Harlan processed the certificate, signed, sealed, filed. You orchestrated the plan, Aaron. Why? Aaron's hands trembled. He took a step back, looking for escape, but the apartment offered none. Rex's eyes never left him. The dog's body language said it all: guilt, exposure, truth. It was supposed to be simple. Aaron finally burst out, voice shaking. The policy, the money, I thought if Ethan was gone, the debts, the loans, they'd be paid. I didn't mean to hurt him. Carter's jaw tightened as he listened. You sedated him, placed him in a coffin, declared him dead. That's not simple, Aaron, that's attempted murder. Aaron sank to his knees, despair and panic washing over him. I didn't want him dead. I thought, his voice broke. The facade of the lifelong friend had shattered, revealing a man trapped by greed, fear, and desperation. Carter's eyes scanned the room, noting the empty pill bottles on the counter, experimental sedatives, the very same type used on Ethan. Every piece fit. Rex had detected life under impossible circumstances, and now Carter had the human culprit. You almost killed him, Carter said quietly, voice heavy. Your greed, your lies, your betrayal, your best friend. You placed him in a coffin and left him to die. Aaron's face twisted with shame and terror. I didn't think anyone would find out. I thought he'd be gone and no one would know. I needed the money. Carter nodded to the detectives, who moved to handcuff Aaron. But as they did, a creeping unease spread through Carter's chest. Aaron's confession explained the immediate danger, but certain pieces didn't add up. The precision, the planning, the rare sedative. Someone else had helped. Someone with medical knowledge. Someone who understood how to bypass the system without raising suspicion. Rex barked once, sharply, and Carter froze. The dog's instincts were alerting him again. There was more to this story than Aaron's desperation. The dog had detected an anomaly, something or someone still nearby, someone who had aided in orchestrating the crime. Carter's mind raced. Aaron had confessed, yes, but the crime was far from fully uncovered. Outside, the town remained oblivious to the full truth. Ethan was alive but still in critical condition. The funeral had been interrupted, but whispers spread like wildfire. He had been buried alive. Social media buzzed with speculation, conspiracy theories, and horror. People wondered how a man could be declared dead and yet survive. No one knew the full story, not yet. Inside the hospital, Carter returned to Ethan's bedside. Rex nudged the young man's hand gently, tail wagging lightly, eyes bright. Ethan's family huddled close, relief mixing with lingering fear. Carter spoke softly, quietly, the weight of the truth pressing on him. Aaron did this, Ethan, Carter said carefully. But he didn't do it alone. Someone else helped him, someone who knew the system, someone who might still be dangerous. Ethan's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face. More than Aaron, who? Carter shook his head. We don't know yet, but Rex picked up on it. He's still alert. And so am I. Whoever helped Aaron is out there and we're going to find them. Rex barked once decisively, as if confirming Carter's words. The dog had uncovered the first layer of the betrayal, but beneath it shadows lurked, deeper, darker, more calculated. And as night fell over the hospital, Carter knew that the story was far from over. The first betrayal had been uncovered, but the true mastermind, the one who had nearly buried Ethan alive, was still at large, and time was running out to prevent them from striking again. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional shuffle of nurses checking IV lines. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting the room into sharp lines of light and shadow. Ethan lay in the hospital bed, wrapped in crisp white sheets, still pale but slowly regaining color as the sedative's effects wore off. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, scanning the room in confusion. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the low hum of medical machinery filled his senses, each one overstimulating yet grounding him in reality. "Hey, Ethan," a soft voice said. It was Linda, sitting beside the bed, holding his hand with trembling fingers. Her eyes were red from crying but shining with relief. "You're awake, you're alive." Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was dry, voice hoarse. "Alive," he croaked. The word was foreign, alien, as if he were speaking about someone else. I was dead, I was." His hands fumbled weakly at the sheets, searching for something to hold onto in a world that no longer made sense. Mark stood behind Linda, leaning forward, his hands pressed together tightly as if in prayer. "Yes, son, you're alive. You're safe now." His voice was firm, but the tension under the surface betrayed his lingering fear. "We thought we lost you, we almost did." Ethan's mind raced, foggy fragments of memory surfacing in disjointed flashes. The bar, the sudden blur of a white van, a sense of weight pressing down, and then nothing until now. He swallowed hard, trying to comprehend what had happened. I don't remember," he whispered, eyes wide, voice shaking. How did this happen?" Carter, standing near the door with Rex at his side, stepped closer. He kept his voice calm, measured. "Ethan, someone tried to kill you. They used a sedative to make it look like you were dead, then they placed you in a coffin. But Rex," he gestured to the dog, who sat alert and watchful, "sensed life before it was too late. That's why you're alive now." Ethan's eyes widened as he glanced at Rex, who wagged his tail softly but kept his gaze locked on him, as if acknowledging the miraculous intervention. "The dog saved me," he whispered, disbelief and awe mingling in his tone. He knew I was alive." Carter nodded. "Rex never makes mistakes. He was trained to detect things humans can't. He detected you when no one else could. He's the reason you're still here." The truth began to hit Ethan in waves, horrifying and incomprehensible. He turned his eyes toward his mother and father, voice trembling. "But why? Who would do this to me? Who would want me dead?" Carter exchanged a glance with Rex before speaking again. "We found out, Ethan. Aaron Fletcher, your childhood friend. He orchestrated the plan. The sedative, the coffin, the falsified death certificate, it was him." Ethan's jaw dropped and he sat up slightly, trembling. "Aaron, my friend, that doesn't make sense. We grew up together, we trusted each other." His voice cracked, the betrayal cutting deeper than the near-death experience. Why would he do this?" Linda's hands shook as she held Ethan. "Sometimes people make terrible choices, baby, choices we can't understand." Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. "But he didn't succeed. You're alive." Mark leaned closer, gripping Ethan's shoulder firmly. "We'll make sure he pays. We'll make sure no one else ever does this again. I promise you." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, the shock and horror colliding with relief and anger. "And the others? Someone helped him, right? It wasn't just Aaron." Carter nodded, the unease returning as he considered the layers of deception. "Yes, someone else was involved. Someone with medical knowledge, someone who knew the system. We haven't caught them yet, but Rex is alert. And so am I. Whoever helped Aaron is still out there." The words settled over Ethan like a cold shadow. Relief from survival clashed with the dread of ongoing danger. He glanced at Rex, who nudged his hand gently with his nose, tail stiff but eyes calm. The dog had saved him once, but the instincts were telling everyone in the room that the threat was not over. Hours passed as Ethan regained strength, each small movement a battle against lingering weakness and disbelief. He listened carefully as Carter outlined what they had discovered so far: Aaron's mounting debts, the falsified death certificate, the rare sedative, and the calculated attempt to make Ethan's death look legitimate. Carter explained that investigators were tracing leads, reviewing surveillance footage, and interviewing associates who might have had knowledge of the plot. Ethan's mind raced, connecting the fragments of his memory with the pieces of evidence Carter described. "The bar, the van, someone was watching me," he said, voice shaky but clear. "It wasn't just Aaron, someone else." Carter nodded gravely. "Yes, that's why we're proceeding carefully. Whoever helped him knew exactly what they were doing, and they're still out there." Linda clutched Ethan's hand tightly, eyes scanning the room for threats invisible to everyone but Carter and Rex. I can't believe this. My baby nearly buried alive, and by someone he trusted." Her voice shook with grief and anger, and tears streamed freely down her face. Rex barked softly, almost reassuringly, then shifted his gaze toward the hospital door. Carter's attention followed the dog's alert stare. He understood immediately. Rex was detecting something, or someone, just beyond the room, a residual scent, a trace of danger that hadn't left. The dog's instincts were never wrong. Ethan shivered slightly, either from the memory or from the knowledge that his life had been deliberately threatened by someone he once trusted. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again," he whispered, voice trembling. "Aaron, my friend, how could he do this?" Carter's expression softened but remained serious. "Sometimes, Ethan, people make choices we can't understand until we see the full picture. But you survived. That's what matters right now. And we're not stopping until we find the person who helped him, the one who made it all possible." Rex barked again, a sharp, decisive sound that cut through the tension in the room. Carter nodded, understanding the urgency. The dog had already identified a lingering threat. Someone had planned Ethan's death carefully, and the second player in this crime had yet to be caught. Ethan's eyes met Carter's, wide with fear and determination. I want to help. I want to know who did this. I don't care how dangerous it is." Carter gave a small nod. "We will, but we proceed carefully. For now, rest. Gather your strength, you'll need it. And Rex, well, he'll continue to watch over you." As Ethan's eyes slowly closed, fatigue overtaking him, Carter stepped back and observed the room. The hospital walls seemed smaller, suffocating almost, yet they offered safety, a fragile barrier against the unseen threat still lingering outside. He looked down at Rex, whose sharp gaze never wavered. The dog had saved a life once, but the instincts were clear. The real danger had only just begun. And somewhere out there, the person who had orchestrated this, who had nearly buried Ethan alive, was watching, waiting, and perhaps planning the next move. Ethan would wake fully to the truth soon, but by then, the hunt for the remaining conspirator would already be in motion. And Carter knew one thing with absolute certainty. No one who tried to kill Ethan Walker would escape justice, not while Rex was on the case. The small town of Cedarville remained cloaked in quiet tension, the events of the past week already the subject of hushed conversations and frantic social media speculation. The funeral home, once filled with solemn grief, had been replaced by a living reminder of a nightmare narrowly avoided. Ethan Walker alive, the boy who had been declared dead. The town buzzed with rumors, disbelief, and a gnawing sense of danger. Ethan, now dressed in a clean hospital gown and supported carefully by his parents, was wheeled back into the old chapel. The coffin that had nearly claimed his life remained in the center, polished and foreboding, a chilling relic of the plan that almost succeeded. Carter and Rex followed closely, the dog's alert posture cutting through the room's uneasy energy. Every eye in the chapel turned toward them. Whispers swirled like smoke. Mark and Linda flanked Ethan, gripping his hands tightly. His eyes were wide, reflecting a mixture of terror, awe, and defiance. The community had gathered, friends, neighbors, strangers, drawn to the macabre tale, the miracle of survival, and the lingering mystery of the perpetrators. Many had come out of curiosity, but the air of suspense was palpable. Carter stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady but firm, commanding attention. "What happened here this week is unlike anything any of us have ever experienced. Ethan Walker was declared dead, placed in a coffin, and buried alive nearly. Someone attempted to end his life with calculated precision. And thanks to Rex," he nodded toward the dog, who barked softly once in acknowledgement, tail stiff but proud, "that attempt failed." The congregation gasped. Ethan's mother clutched his arm, relief and lingering fear intermingling. Ethan's eyes darted around the room, catching sight of friends who had come to mourn or celebrate the miracle, and strangers whispering with disbelief. The full weight of what had almost occurred pressed down on him. Carter continued, "We have apprehended Aaron Fletcher, the friend who orchestrated this attempt. But he was not acting alone. There is still another involved, someone with access, knowledge, and a willingness to commit this crime. Our investigation is ongoing." A shiver ran through the audience. The idea that the danger was not fully eliminated made the atmosphere almost suffocating. Murmurs rose, concern and curiosity mixing into a tense symphony. Some parents held their children closer. Some people glanced nervously at the exits. Even the police officers in the room, present to maintain order, appeared uneasy. Ethan swallowed, heart pounding. His voice, weak but clear, finally broke the silence. I almost died. I was buried alive, and it wasn't an accident. Someone wanted me gone." His words sent a ripple of horror through the crowd. "I trusted people. I didn't know someone so close could do this, but I'm still here, and I'm not afraid to find the truth." Rex barked sharply, nudging Ethan's hand gently with his nose. Carter smiled faintly. The dog's instincts had been the first warning, the invisible shield that had saved a life. But now, Rex's alertness suggested a new danger, the unseen accomplice who had helped Aaron. Carter knew that while the immediate threat was contained, the story was far from over. Carter leaned slightly toward Ethan, speaking quietly so only he could hear. "Rex and I will make sure whoever helped Aaron pays for what they did. You survived, Ethan, but we have to be vigilant. There are still shadows out there waiting." Ethan nodded slowly, a mixture of fear and resolve settling over him. "I want to help. I want people to know what happened. They need to understand, and they need to be careful." The crowd listened, rapt. Many felt chills as they realized that the coffin, the sedative, the near death, it had been a warning. Not just for Ethan, but for anyone who might cross the wrong path in Cedarville. Carter's words, Ethan's survival, and Rex's unwavering vigilance turned the tragic story into a lesson, a grim reminder of how fragile life could be, and how easily trust could be manipulated. Suddenly, Rex's ears perked up. His body stiffened. Carter's eyes followed the dog's gaze, scanning the room. The dog's instincts detected something or someone that the human eye could not. A shadow flitted near the far corner of the chapel. Carter's hand instinctively reached for his radio, signaling for backup, while his eyes never left the unseen threat. A woman in a dark coat hesitated near the exit, glancing nervously at Ethan, Carter, and Rex. She froze as Rex's growl intensified, low and deliberate. Carter's heart sank. The accomplice or someone connected was present. They had returned, perhaps to observe, perhaps to strike again. Ethan gripped his parents' hands tighter, eyes wide. Is it happening again?" he whispered. Carter shook his head slightly, voice calm but firm. "Not while Rex and I are here, but we need to be cautious. This is a warning, Ethan. Someone wanted to finish what they started, and they're watching." Rex barked sharply once more, announcing the dog's detection to the room. The woman in the dark coat flinched, glanced around, and disappeared swiftly through the side exit. Carter cursed under his breath. The danger was not neutralized. It had only moved into the shadows. The room buzzed with whispered speculation. Ethan, trembling, realized the truth. Survival didn't mean the danger was gone. It meant vigilance. It meant recognizing that betrayal could lurk anywhere, even in familiar faces, in trusted friends, and in the quiet corners of the town. Mark and Linda pulled Ethan close, shielding him with a mixture of love and terror. Carter scanned the room, eyes sharp, phone ready, radio in hand. Rex remained at Ethan's side, alert, every muscle taut, every sense tuned to danger. Together, they were a silent warning. Life had been spared, but the darkness that had nearly claimed it was still out there. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the coffin remained in the center, a stark symbol of how close they had come to tragedy. People whispered about the miracle, about the dog who had saved a life, and about the betrayal that had nearly gone unnoticed. Social media would explode in hours, but the message was clear. Vigilance, trust, and the instincts of a loyal companion had made the difference between life and death. And somewhere beyond the chapel doors, the accomplice watched, plotting, calculating, aware that the story wasn't finished. Carter's gaze followed the empty exit for a moment, then returned to Ethan and Rex. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Not by a long shot." Ethan nodded, strength and resolve slowly returning to his eyes. "Then we'll be ready. We won't let them win." Rex barked once, sharply, as if affirming the pledge. The town of Cedarville had witnessed a miracle, and a warning had been sent. But the shadows lingered, and Carter knew that the next chapter of this harrowing story was only beginning. Outside, the winter wind whispered through the streets, carrying with it the echo of danger and the promise of justice. The coffin, the nearly buried boy, and the vigilant dog had left a mark on Cedarville, a story of survival, betrayal, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. And though the immediate threat had been delayed, the lesson was clear. Evil could hide in plain sight, but loyalty, courage, and instinct would always fight back. The room went silent. The coffin remained, and the warning echoed in every heart present: trust cautiously, watch carefully, and never underestimate the instincts of those who fight to protect life. Because in Cedarville, one miracle had occurred, but the hunt for the truth, the justice, and the remaining conspirator was far from over.